Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome back for a record tying fifth time my friend Mark Nelson. He is the managing director of the Radiant Energy Group. Mark, welcome back to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you, Robert. What is it they say? You always remember your fifth.
No, I don't know. I have no idea. But now you are tied with Meredith Angwin for the most.
I think that means we are going steady.
Okay, well, there you go. I thought you were going to say that familiarity breeds contempt or something like that, but no. Glad to have you back. There's a bunch to talk about. And you've been on 5 times now, but the rules still apply. You have to introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Mark Nelson. I'm from the great state of Oklahoma, but I'm living now in Chicago, where I run and manage Radiant Energy Group, a consultancy focused on the opportunities and pitfalls of the great energy transition.
That's a good summary right there. Well, you've spent a lot of time in Europe, and the reason I wanted to get you back on right now is because of what is going on in Europe and a lot of change, especially since this summer when nat gas at TTF, the trading hub in Holland, was at $100. I just looked; it's trading at $19.24 on the front month. What's the latest in Europe? Has Europe dodged a bullet now because they're having warm weather? Their gas supplies are essentially full. Gas costs are way down. What's the situation now?
Yeah, actually, the mood among really sharp and informed folks in Europe is positive, but we're grading on a curve. It's positive because they thought everything might collapse in an awful anarchic whirlwind this winter, and instead, it might not even do that next winter. So, yes, they're losing their industry. Quality of life is declining in countries around Europe. There's a lot of hopelessness and despair. Things are looking very grim, but that's a lot nicer than, say, thinking that your energy supplies might be rationed or cut off this winter.
Or that people would be freezing to death because of a harsh winter. But
exactly.
But talk about that, about the mood, because this is important. And also, I was surprised to see that Germany's GDP actually grew something like 2% last year. Now, is that a real number? Is that a fake number? Your eyes are rolling around there, indicating you maybe not believing this.
Fake-ish, in that there are lots of swords hanging over heads, and you can see the strings starting to unwind. But if you're measuring against thinking the swords would fall, then it feels you're thankful just to be alive, right?
Right.
Think of how good even a bad meal tastes if you're at the edge of starvation. Yeah.
Right.
In terms of how real the number is, this is kind of crazy. The mood is more positive in Germany than in other countries that are struggling worse. Certainly, things are quite grim in the UK. And although the numbers seem okay on paper, I've seen some people call this a vibe session. The vibes are off, but the numbers look okay. And they look stronger in Germany than they do in a number of other places where, although there are companies that will not be able to operate past this year as their contracts from the before times get used up, they operated through the winter, or they were shutting down, and those numbers will show up later.
And so, I'm sorry to interrupt. So, when were you last in Europe, and where were you?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I left for London and was in the UK for about 10 days.
Okay, and today we're January 20th, so you were there this year, this
the
month.
First 2 weeks of the year, basically.
Okay, yeah. In the UK, but you were you not? You were in Estonia before the end of the year as well, or
no? Well, I was in a lot of places in Europe dancing around before the winter properly hit. So it was several cities in Germany, was in the UK also, and yeah, visited Estonia, and then I spoke in Poland. First time visiting Poland.
So you mentioned
the mood was very bad, and it got worse as there was a cold first half of December without wind, but then the wind came, so everybody started feeling better. Then there were a few other things that went well. For example, the gas burn in Germany would be much higher right now, except for the life extension of nuclear plants through currently April 15th. So nuclear plants are not necessary except for wintertime, but only this winter, not next winter. That's the current scenario in Berlin. We're making crucial energy policy decisions based on day-to-day or even week-to-week weather conditions. If the weather had been colder in December, we might have a longer stay of execution for the nuclear plants. If the weather were warmer at the start of December, they might have been closed already.
Let's talk about
These
that
are
because
not particularly serious or responsible leaders who have been put into control of the nuclear situation, and that fact that policy sort of goes back and forth based on the current today's storage levels up and down in the underground storage facilities across Europe. It's almost unthinkable. But if you thought you were going to collapse this winter and you got a stay of execution, you can go one of two ways, Robert. You can learn from it and say, I never want to feel like I was in that position again. I never want to be shocked. I never want to be surprised. Never want to be up against the wall. Or you can say, see, it wasn't so bad. The people who explain all these complicated numbers to me, all those experts and economists, they were wrong. We can live without nuclear. We can live without Nord Stream.
But you said something about the weather there that to me, this is the part of the whole equation that I just can't square, which is that we're looking at climate change and we're looking at more extreme weather, hotter, colder, or both, more extensive periods, more gyrations. If this is the situation, why in the world would we ever make our most important energy and power networks dependent on the weather? I mean, this just seems like I'm from Oklahoma too. I'm slow. I'm not the sharpest pair of scissors in the drawer. I don't, why isn't this obvious to policymakers? You're talking about the policymakers and particularly in Germany. What, I wrote this question down. Why can't Germany arrive at any kind of sensible policy? That's one of the questions I wrote down here.
You're saying, why don't we think in terms of really long-term things that take longer than elections, instead of gyrating back and forth in ways that, with the weather blowing back and forth, that makes immense amounts of money for commodity traders. It's a very exciting for the economic theorists to theorize the market functions and to watch everything work. It's very exciting to get your pulse moving if you're in politics. Why would you do long-term things to smooth this out when you can do short-term things to take advantage of any chaos that being caused by it? I don't understand why you would want this boring world of just operating always far from emergency margins. Okay, if you're riding the edge, come ride the edge with us, Robert.
Well, okay.
Make money, make fortunes, lose fortunes, blackouts. I mean, it's great excitement we can live for instead of this boring modernity where everything's just the same every day, where the weather changes, but it's the same temperature inside the house. Why live like that?
Okay, you're being facetious here, but Meredith Angwin was on another, one of the other record holders on the podcast. She said, we want a boring grid. But why, what is it? I want to plumb this thing about Germany because I am truly stumped here. And it goes back to the Garzweiler mine. I want to talk about this issue because you had 15,000, according to the police, 15,000 protesters descending on this small village on the edge of the Garzweiler coal mine, Lignite mine, because the mine is being expanded by RWE. They're going to bulldoze a local village. They are bulldozing an existing wind project. And in 3 months, they're closing a nuclear plant. As I look at this, I did a short video on this. This is crazy town. This is so insane. I can't form the words for it.
It's not insane. I can explain it.
Well, then please, because I think it's full on crazy.
First of all, this whole expanding mines, eating villages, that sort of thing, that's been happening for well over a century, for a century and a half. This is just how you mine lignite. And we'll come back to lignite. But this company sees that the earth itself is made out of fuel, the only fuel available in Germany if you're not willing to get the gas and you're not willing to mine deep to get the coal, right? So, and you're not willing to make uranium from German formation. Like, I get it. That's what's left in Germany that acts like fuel to stabilize. You just said you want a boring grid. Okay, fine. So let's take that seriously. You want a boring grid that's stable. It's going to take some fuel. Lignite seems to be the fuel they've defaulted to because it's the one they have the most of. The earth is made out of it. All you have to do is scoop it, wheel it away, turn it into briquettes, dry it a little bit, and burn it right there in some of the most modern coal plants in the world. Some of the finest coal plants in the world, and you just have to scoop it out of the earth and put it in. The earth is made of fuel. You need to only eat it. The villagers know the score. They knew it. Garzweiler mine. There's no Garzweiler anymore. That used to be a village where now there's a 19 square kilometer mine right there where there used to be a village. Garzweiler people have moved on. Heck, they may have helped dig out the village themselves. It's a mining culture. They're mature people. They know there are pluses and minuses. But as I heard from an old mining hand in Germany when I visited in 2017 in the east, past Berlin, where they have similarly gargantuan mines over there, he said, look, it's our homeland. This is our fuel source. This is what we're based on. Nuclear, oh, that's suspicious, weird, new. We don't need any nuclear. But my own grandfather came to this part of the world from Far East Europe to mine this material. All the villagers are happy. They get brand new houses on this location. They give up the ones in that location. And when we're done eating the earth, we're gonna fill it with water, and you're gonna have a recreation lake. What's so bad about that? What's so bad about that?
So, well, let's talk about lignite, because there's a lot of lignite here in the US. It's a low rank coal, a high ash. Talk about that. You've done some research on lignite. Tell us about that, because this is the fuel this is the coal that's being dug out of the Garzweiler mine to fuel the power plants nearby that are producing on an annual basis just a little bit more, 37 terawatt hours a year, whereas the nuclear plants that are being slated for shuttering in April, producing about 30 terawatt hours. So talk about the lignite itself. What is this? And is the German lignite different than other lignites in other countries?
So rank of coal is referring to the relative carbon content of the coal. And you'd think, oh, isn't coal all carbon? Nope. Some coal is extremely high purity, nearly black, shiny, almost pure carbon from being cooked in the earth at high temperatures. That's the key thing. It's not even the time spent cooking. It's the temperature, because things tend to happen slowly in the earth. You get to a certain temperature, you're probably going to finish the process, right? The highest ranks of coal have been cooked at hundreds of degrees in the earth.
And these would be the anthracites and
like anthracite. Yeah, like the metallurgical coals that have extremely high carbon contents, very low purity, or very few impurities, very low moisture. When they burn, you're burning almost entirely carbon. So you get all that, it's not like nuclear waste where you're stuck with this waste. True, you're stuck with a bunch of waste, but a bunch of it you get to just put in the air. It's just kind of the score and even in Germany, they're more comfortable with that than with nuclear waste so far. Lignite is coal that has been baked at temperatures under boiling temperature of water. So temperatures are not high enough to, you might say, purify into the bituminous or the subbituminous coal, and then finally the anthracite, which is the black shiny coal that we think of when we think of Appalachian coal mines, right? Lignite coal is kind of brown and sort of like a really stiff taffy kind of.
Right. And it's generally higher moisture, higher ash, and
much higher in moisture, higher in ash, which means you have to burn more of it to get the same amount of usable energy compared to other types of coal. That's what ends up giving you the higher carbon numbers, the higher carbon intensity.
Right.
So for those who are interested in this little area, coal plants, depending on their efficiency, which partly is dependent on the rank of coal they're burning, are anywhere from, say, the newest, finest coal plants in the world, which are often in Germany too, are about 850 to 900 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Lignite plants in Germany are going to run from a bit above 1,000 to 1,300 or 1,400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour usable energy. Natural gas runs from the very most efficient plants run in stable baseload mode is going to be down in the 330, 340, 350 range, I believe is the current standard for combined cycle natural gas plants in terms of grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, then open cycle gas turbine is going to be 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you can have these lignite plants that are running in baseload mode at 3 times or more CO2 per kilowatt hour.
Well, so and this is the part again that just I just can't get my mind around it. That why would the Germans do this? I mean, why would they continue to persist with this and shut off their nuclear plants? So address we talked about the coal. So is it that the Green Party is that strong that despite all the facts that we're seeing, despite the fact Nord Stream has been blown up, despite the fact Europe is saying we're not going to go back to Russian gas, despite the fact that they're burning lignite, which is the most carbon intensive method of electricity generation, why in the name of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph are they closing their nuclear plants?
Look, because they were told they wouldn't have to sacrifice anything. They could turn off the nuclear, turn off the coal, have as many renewables as they wanted, take it as long as they wanted in the transition. If it was a more aggressive, green-oriented government, they could say our transition will only take 10 years. If they were a less aggressive, more, I don't know, business-oriented German government, they could say it'll take a little longer, don't worry about it. But as long as that Nord Stream pipeline came in, Robert, they were building enough gas plants and planning to import enough gas from their best buds, Russia, in order to have everything phase out. And if you combine natural gas with tons of renewables, you can get those CO2 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour numbers. You can get them pretty low. Not low like France or Sweden, or not low enough to meet your climate goals, but you could get the progress that seems like it's headed in the correct direction, and you could just keep squeezing it more and more renewables, fewer and fewer bursts of gas power. That was the plan, right? So they built the pipeline and started closing the nuclear reactors. Yep, got it, right?
Yeah, with you so
far. And they started closing their hard coal mines, that's the black coal, but keeping the lignite. Then they started taking coal plants and putting them on, say, mothballing them, just putting them on like a 5-year storage plan where you wouldn't just get rid of a nuclear plant just because you wouldn't get rid of a coal plant just because you're closing it. That's for the poor countries that can't afford to just keep up a bunch of plants that they're not using. No, Germany's rich. So while they were urging other countries to turn off their nuclear and coal, they were keeping their coal plants and building Nord Stream, right? Nord Stream, 55 BCM, 55 billion cubic meters per year of gas, doubling Nord Stream 1. That's up to 110 billion cubic meters of gas per year. You could turn off the coal. You can turn off the nuclear. That's enough. Then the war started. Now the world, somebody blew up the pipeline. So,
but now the world has changed, and yet they still haven't. They still haven't done an about face.
Has it really changed, Robert? They can survive this winter. Maybe that means nothing's changed at all.
Well, then let's talk.
Let's talk. Germany is not like Germany isn't poor like the UK is, or Italy or Spain or those other poor countries. Germany's proper rich, which means that they can rapidly build a bunch of liquefied natural gas terminals, LNG terminals, super fast, no issues with environmental permits, no, times have changed, right? So they got that built real fast. They're going to build 5 import terminals, and they're going around signing expensive, relatively short-term deals compared to cheaper, longer-term deals because, climate change, they're going to phase it all out, right? It's just temporary measures to replace their gas pipeline from Russia that got blown up. So they're building these LNG terminals, and then they're finding plenty of natural gas. It used to be headed for poor countries, but poor countries don't need it. Germany can make what those countries need, right? So Germany is taking gas supplies that the market had expected to send to developing countries because German funded institutions like World Bank
and Bangladesh, those countries were among them, right?
Exactly. So countries
have effectively been priced out of the market for that LNG that's now going to go to Germany. And you mentioned the LNG terminal. They built one that was in like 3 months, 100 days or something. They built one incredibly quickly,
it's why you can never count out the Germans. Other countries are much more likely to suffer from German policy mistakes than Germany is.
Wow.
They're that organized. So that's part of the answer to this puzzle. I'm being a little bit facetious sometimes, but seriously, let me be devil's advocate here. When the Germans find a direction to move in. They move until something makes them stop, and nothing has made them yet.
And what would be the thing that would make them stop?
I don't know. I don't know what somebody was thinking who blew up Nord Stream. Honestly, there are people who say it was USA. They have a good argument. People who say it might have been one of the Baltic countries that would be next to be invaded if Russia was on the march. That's a decent argument. I know some excellent reasons why it could be Russia that blew up the pipeline. But whatever it was, it didn't take out all the pipelines. It merely showed that it was possible to take out all the pipelines. It didn't take out the ones that were sanctioned, right? So just the unsanctioned gas pipelines got blown up.
Well, so does it all for the moment then come down to the price of gas? Because I mentioned then, earlier we were at $100 at TTF in August. And now, as I said, the front month today, January 20th, $19.24. Henry Hub is sub $4 here in the US. So is this all coming down fundamentally? There are a lot of factors at play, but
yeah, well, think about it this way. Germany does not have to pay unlimited high prices for this gas. All they have to do is pay a little bit more than anyone else can afford. And as other countries run down their economy, growth starts slowing. As things get worse for the rest of the world, the price that Germany has to pay to beat them out on the market gets smaller. It's perfect. Market's working as intended. And remember, the World Bank, an institution where a lot of the policy is set pretty much by like USA and Germany, and the money comes from USA and Germany kind of. And the IMF, same sort of thing. They haven't really allowed funding of anything but renewables and natural gas for a while. So you have a bunch of countries that aren't rich yet and cannot outbid Germany for this fuel that Germany is now buying up.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned renewables and gas, but the EU has agreed on this new taxonomy to include natural gas and nuclear, which is a big about face. So let's talk about nuclear in Europe. You had some announcement that you wanted to, or something discovery that you'd made about the German nuclear plants that have been that have been closed. What's the status of those 3 plants that were shuttered last fall? Am I remembering correctly?
Germany appears to be hedging. As of December 31st, 2021, 6 nuclear plants were operating in Germany, making about 60 terawatt hours per year, or another 40% more than that giant mine that's been the subject of protests makes in a year. So 60 terawatt hours per year, carbon free, but I don't think Germany cares about that. If ever, they definitely don't now. And from 6 giant, ultra modern, ultra high performance reactors, arguably the finest reactors in the world. What do I mean by fine? It means that they were built to have almost unlimited upgrade paths, like big hatches where you could easily insert and remove equipment. That's been something that's taken out US plants, where errors in substituting out the big equipment from cutting through containment has destroyed entire plants, like in Crystal River in Florida, got knocked offline. Or in California, issues in replacing parts was used as a reason to kill a plant by the California leadership back in the middle of last decade. So that isn't an issue in Germany because the quality of their parts, the quality of their steel, quality of their operation procedures. Also, they design these plants to operate with a minimum number of employees. It's astonishing what they did. They designed the plants to be able to be accessed and maintained internally in containment during operation, which US plants do not. They're not set up to work that way. What it all means, Robert, is that these plants were set up for another century of life at least, with about 300 to 400 employees per reactor, and each reactor among the largest in the world, between 1,300 and 1,500 megawatts. Very high uptime. We're talking about 20 euros per megawatt hour for the fuel, or for the operating expenses, including the fuel, about a quarter to a third of that being the fuel. Here's what I wanted to say about the German nuclear. The fact that they're hedging is partly just the economics, where in German nuclear plants, they're required to keep the full complement of staff after shutting off. Whereas at Indian Point, they laid off, they got rid of 80% of the staff the day after the plant lost its license. They started to ripping it apart straight away, right? No backsies. Well, in Germany, there's some backseas. Some room to take it back, and the plant has to keep a full complement of staff until receiving official decommissioning permission. That's the official permission to start doing irreversible damage. And irreversible is a little bit of a funny term, because if Germany had the same attitude towards a half deconstructed nuclear plant that they do towards the LNG terminals, who knows? They could get it back into shape very quickly. But for these three nuclear plants that were shut down as of January 1st, 2022, that was about half, or about 30 terawatt hours. One of these had already had permission to start doing deconstruction that's going to be harder to repair. The other two, however, are in mint condition, ready to go.
So the punchline here is that what you're saying, without saying, is that these plants could be brought back online. And this is a way that
they've evidently applied for permission to deconstruct the other two of these three that were shut down on New Year's last year, and they haven't received permission.
So
what is that? Is that like a deep state survival instinct or what? I don't know, but it means that somehow something, and I doubt that it's just lost paperwork. The Germans are incredible at paperwork. They are just the best. They're the best filers of paperwork, the best adherents to arbitrary paperwork. They are incredible at paperwork. It's just a talent of the people. It just doesn't feel like it's a paperwork issue. It feels like it's intentional. And I like to see it because it means there's time for the coalition in charge of Germany to break apart on the subject of nuclear. Why is that necessary? It's because it is fundamental to the identity of the German Green Party, the leading Green Party in the whole world, because it was sort of the flashpoint between East and West in the Cold War. It was lavished attention from the intelligence communities, both East and West, were lavished on Germany, and a really good move that Moscow did is they, of course, love nuclear. They don't even need it to be particularly safe. If you saw Chernobyl, but they needed other countries that were not part of the Soviet orbit to not do nuclear. So it was a very important thing to help get really strong green movements supported all over, especially in West Germany. What Germany still provides majority of the global funding for Greenpeace, for example, which employs my professional antagonists, like the guys I would go up against in TV debates and stuff. There's money still coming out of Germany for that, right? So it's
this is one of the biggest in climate NGOs in the world. Their budget, the last time I checked, over $300 million a year. This is very large.
Climate's probably a weird way to put it. I don't know if they'd prioritize it quite like that, Robert, but certainly one of the most important anti-nuclear NGOs.
Fair enough. Okay, anti-nuclear NGOs. So let's switch gears. Let's talk more broadly about Europe. Belgium, Tractebel has been, as I understand, is owned by Engie, and they're going forward with the closure of their nuclear plants. Is that correct? Have I?
So this is where there's some cautious good news.
Okay.
Belgium has a phase out that's, if anything, a bit more suicidal than Germany's. So about 50% of their electricity until a few weeks ago was nuclear. So 50%, one of the highest percentages in the world. 2 nuclear plants, Tihang in the I guess the poorer French speaking area, and Doel in the richer northern Dutch speaking area, and 4 reactors at Doel, 3 at Tihang. And Belgium was going to try to shut all those down by 2025. This is a law being executed from back in 2003, just to show you how these dead policies keep rolling over and only really get enforced once you get a Green Party in government like Belgium has now. But Belgium is in such a bad situation with replacing that energy, they literally can't. There's not enough. They didn't get enough gas plants approved. They just cannot. So even though
there's no other replacement supply. I mean, this is one of the things Alexander Stahel talked about on the podcast a few weeks ago about electricity across the European continent is short, and some countries are shorter in terms of supply than others. Italy, in particular, he talked about. Britain being another one, very short. So you're saying what Belgium is recognizing that without these nuclear plants, they're going to be catastrophically short of power, and therefore they have to keep them open. Is that? I'm trying to restate what I think I'm hearing you say.
So the Green Party in Belgium blinked. they do or either do not have the death wish of the German Greens, or feel that they have a weaker position, or they had more pressure and were told you'll be thrown straight out of coalition government if you don't bend on this. Like, I don't know what power moved behind the scenes to get this change, but Green Energy Minister Tina van der Straten, and by the way, just the fact that the Green Party keeps getting these energy ministries and these weird coalition governments, it's kind of like the revenge of game theory. It's the tyranny of the intolerant minority, where if you have a Green Party that says we'll go along with anybody, we'll go along with any politics, we'll join up with any party in any coalition, we have one demand. One, the energy ministry so we can kill your nuclear, then that's too tempting. It means that for the people who have spent their entire lives trying to be prime minister and are in one of the mainstream parties, if they can choose to be prime minister by merely saying yes and letting these weirdos have the energy ministry, why not just let them have it? Robert, the polling isn't even that great for nuclear. And who even understands electricity? Iron law. What's that? Gonna give me a college lecture, you big nerd? It's just electricity. What can it cost? $10? Anyway, so you can be king. You can be prime minister. You can be written into the history books if you just add the Greens, who will give you what you need
to push to give you 50
parliamentary majority,
51% of the vote, and so you get to be in power.
And they did incredibly well in the elections in 2020, where it appeared that we were done needing energy because everyone stayed home and there was oversupply for a year and prices went negative.
Okay, well,
so there's a bit of a rhythm to history sometimes, and in this case, there was that's like that was the downbeat that put the Greens in control of major European economies in terms of the lifeline, the energy supply.
But now elections
aren't coming for a few more years. Governments will fall if they fall out of coalition. The principles of coalition government is that you don't do big policies unless all coalition parties agree, or else you lose government in these parliamentary systems, right? You see what's happening here. And if the Greens, if all they want is the energy ministry, you just give them. Well, all of that sidetrack aside, in Belgium, the Greens blinked. Minister van der Straten, who I met, had a short, unenlightening conversation with in Egypt at COP27, the big climate conference. She was a lawyer with a firm that worked for Gazprom, so she was familiar with the energy issues in a way that her counterpart in Germany was not. I'm not saying she still works for Gazprom or anything like that. Nobody in Europe really works for Gazprom now, at least not directly. But she at least understood energy, arguably a little bit more than her counterpart over in Germany, Robert Habeck. But she was also in a much worse position because Belgium's much more screwed, because 50% is not the same as what Germany's doing. Germany's going from 12% to 0% over about 16 months, from the end of December 2021 to, at the moment, April 15th. What Belgium was doing was 50% to 0 from late 2022 until I guess it'd be mid-year 2025 was the schedule. So a little less than 3 years.
But just to be clear, so where is Belgium now? Are they still saying they're going to shutter them in their nuclear plants in April, or have they
signed an agreement to negotiate the keeping of one reactor at each of the two plants that currently supply about 45% of electricity, because they shut down a 1 gigawatt reactor already. So I'm headed back to Belgium here in a few days. In this same thing as we did in Indian Point, right? Where we've got to mark the event and get the attention of the public on the closure date of that reactor in the city where it's being closed.
So this is going to be a public let me see, a public motivation, activation, public demonstrations. You're talking about marches.
Thank you to the plant and its workers. A warning and attention gathering event for what's happening to Europe. Because it's not just, if Belgium were an isolated grid, the nuclear phase out would be canceled already. You don't go from 50% to 0. You can't do that. But it's not an isolated grid. In fact, I saw just the other day, somebody was showing how the UK energy story is a success, because they was super low carbon for a few hours or something. And you
Right.
looked at the numbers and you're like, wait, you've got 2 nuclear reactors worth of power coming in from France. You've got 1 nuclear reactor's worth of power coming from Belgium. In fact, the amount coming into Belgium in this sort of viral energy Twitter tweet saying how good Britain was doing was exactly the amount is going to be shut off in 10 days.
So then
So they're going to be able to pass the pain along. It's a musical chairs. Really, if we want to give your listeners a really strong image for what's happening in Europe, it's a game of musical chairs, and Germany is never left without a seat. So the fact that they're taking some of the chairs out, is that really going to hurt Germany, or is it going to hurt whatever poor bastard can't get past the Germans to get a seat before the music stops?
So this is Machiavelli comes to play with your electric grid.
I don't know if they're that, I don't know, smart or even evil about it. They're just richer about it, you know? You know how some problems you don't feel if you're not poor enough to suffer the consequences of?
So let's switch then. So you've been in Estonia. You have strong contacts there. I saw that it was just a couple of days ago that Estonia announced a deal with the State Department, the U.S. State Department, on SMRs. What's that about?
Well, a little bit of background for people on Estonia. It's almost a city state based around the great medieval trading city of Tallinn, what's called Revel, Revel. So it's a Hanseatic lead city. What does this mean? So there's this big fortress, castle, trading halls, the German, Polish, there's just a big entrepot, a big meeting point of people anywhere who wanted to do business of the staple commodities coming out of the vast Slavic wildernesses, right? The oak, the honey, the furs come out of the Muscovy, that region comes down the river, comes out of the Baltics, and is traded in Tallinn for cloth, machinery, iron goods, those sorts of things coming in from the Germanic trading cities further west. So Tallinn is something like 40 or 50% of the population in its surrounding areas of a tiny country of about a million people, where there's no other city that's above several thousand people, just to show you how this is kind of this trading town and it's farming hinterland. So that country was occupied at the end of World War II. I mean, they were just caught, like many of the countries in Eastern Europe, between smashing, destructive, invasive armies. They were very quick to get their independence. They've been richer per capita than the rest of the Soviet Union for a long time, and remain so. And they're doing it not from minerals, really, because they only have a little bit of some of the crappiest fossil fuel known to man. It's oil shale. It's like a yellowish, powdery rock with fossils in it that can be burned, but it gives off a sort of rough heat, let's just say. So they have this big plant left over from the Soviet Union powering its electricity from this incredibly dirty fossil fuel, and they would like to replace a major chunk of that with a nuclear reactor. And they're a country that has extremely rapid bureaucratic processes, that very little red tape, where doing something right is often enough to be legal. Where in a lot of places like California, where I used to live, something being legal is only the starting point for whether it happens, because of the extra bureaucracy layered on top of whether something's legal or not. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
So there's an idea that if they're nimble, quick, excellent, hire the best minds from around the world, adopt the very best practices where applicable, and make their own new best practices where applicable, they can get a small nuclear plant on the ground in operation potentially before 2030.
Well, so let's back up then just to talk about SMRs more generally. And I've been following the NRC. I know you have as well. We've talked about this before. Um, will nuclear succeed in Europe before it succeeds in the United States? New nuclear, I'm talking about that deployment of new SMRs or new AP1000, new gigawatt scale reactors. Why do you believe? I've heard you say this. Why do you believe it will happen in Europe before the U.S.?
They need it more. And they're not distracted by novelty, even if they build a new reactor, if that makes sense. In other words, there's a survival instinct kicking in a place like Estonia, a will to continue existing, which is not, it's a land where that's been in question, where they've had various purges back and forth from invading powers, tearing people out of their homes and killing them to reset the country. And they don't want that again. And it feels like energy security is the strongest way to make sure they stay independent. And their independence isn't some, oh, freedom, I like feeling that I'm breathing free air. It's not some abstraction like that. Physical security and independence are the same thing for Estonia. So they have to have it in a way, and we don't have to have it. We could be crappy, poor, falling apart in America, and we still have, our nuclear arsenal. Our borders are still pretty simple, just Canada and Mexico, kind of. That's the big ones.
Right.
We're in a better physical state.
So our geography is better, and we have $4 gas, and they still have $20 gas right now. I mean, it's still 5x. So I've talked about nat gas before, but this, if I'm going to read this back to you, that you're also, as I'm hearing you say, or maybe I'm just reading between the lines, this is ultimately also, it's not just about being invaded before, it's about that fundamental cost of the commodity that drives their economy. And if it's at $20, there's a much greater motivation for them to go nuclear than what we see here in the US.
Exactly. And yeah, gas is going up, gas is going down. But what's clear is that gas will probably always, just for our lifetimes, let's just say, be cheaper in the United States,
right,
than it will be in Europe.
We have better rocks, we have
never say never. Weirder things have happened, Robert. Who knows? But we have so much area that could continue to be drilled, even at double our price. That's going to be something now with the liquefied natural gas connections between Europe and America. There will be more of a linkage, a stronger and stronger linkage all the time. And assuming we don't abandon the principles of commercial contracts and things like that, assume we don't have a president that, say, if there's outrage about gas and people blame the gas being exported to Europe, and a populist president says, no, we're going to nationalize it, or we're going to cancel the supplies, or we're going to do something to physically force contracts to be broken that are shipping gas to Europe. It's a little hard to imagine that. I guess it's possible. Australia is in a weird position where they're facing that problem in its maturation. That problem is now coming full force in Australia, where they developed a gas industry on this side. They need it on this side. There isn't a pipeline. And to get it seaborne, you put yourselves directly in the path of the global market price and ultra long-term contracting from Asian buyers. And that's a very bad problem that Australia is having to face. I don't know what's going to happen there. I see that as being very far away, if ever, in coming to US shores. But that connection with Europe does mean that the rising gas prices will provide a little bit of, I don't know if artificial is the right word, a little bit of benefit, a little bit of cushion and breathing room for America's remaining nuclear plants. I'm feeling amazing going into 2023 about the survival of every last one of America's existing nuclear plants at the moment, and potentially even our first nuclear Lazarus, our first example of a plant losing its operating license and potentially gaining it again. That's Palisades in Michigan. We had no hope because it closed, but then Holtec, the buyer, the undertaker of the U.S. nuclear industry, now I say that with love rather than with fear or hate, the undertaker decided we want a path to being an operator. No better way than to, not tear apart this plant and get it back up and running as soon as possible. They applied to the Department of Energy, stay online. Their application was rejected, and we were crushed again. Great. That's why you don't get your hopes up, Robert. Diablo was a one-off. We're not going to save others. No, Holtec, the owner of Palisades up in Michigan on the other side of the lake from me in Chicago, they've reapplied, and we'll see if they're going to be sort of handheld and walk through the process, put together a bid that's accepted to return on the plant. Every other nuclear plant, however, appears to be fairly safely in the money for the amount of time it'll take to build up enough natural gas export capacity to hopefully prevent future nuclear closures from happening in the US.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Palisades because that is a very interesting story, and Holtec is interesting. I've been meaning to contact. I want to have Chris Singh on. He owns that company because I just think it's a very interesting story, as you say, that they're the plant shut Entergy handed them the keys and said, okay, it's yours now, and Holtec said, well, and they applied once, got rejected for federal money under the this was it the stimulus bill. It was not the IRA. It was from 2021. But let's move on. So, what about coal more broadly? Today, it's January 20th. Bloomberg reported that China is going to build 70 gigawatts of new coal-fired capacity. It's coal and gas, not just coal. It's on top of 40 gigawatts of new coal and gas last year. So that's 110 gigawatts.
Don't miss the real headline. The real headline that's out there is about their, I think 80 or 90 gigawatts of solar they installed.
Fair enough. And they're also building a massive amount of new nuclear. But the other
by global standards, yes.
Yeah. The other big headline is India saying it's going to be consuming, but their coal burn this year will increase by about 8%. We talked about lignite in Germany. Give me your quick take on global coal, because we're seeing the Newcastle marker late in the last time I looked, $370 a ton. That's the Asian thermal coal market. That's up 7.5 times what it was in mid 2020. Talk a lot about the rise in oil and gas prices. Coal prices have grown far faster than the growth in other hydrocarbons. How do you read the global coal market?
Well, it could be that the way Europeans have set up electricity pricing that kind of ties together the price of different fuels, so you can sort of compare. And if the price goes up, maybe an expensive fuel gets used more. Price goes down, and expensive fuel gets used less. Well, Europe is saving so much energy by combination of genuine thrift and also deep economic damage that'll be revealed in later years, the loss of various industries, that kind of saves a little bit of fossil fuels for some other people. So it's in a way, if you're looking at emissions, Europe is finally giving back to those lucky bits of the developing world that are truly developing, while also damaging those unlucky parts of the developing world that did not have whatever it takes to keep up the energy supply during this crisis. If you're hearing the increasing capacity and purchases in India and China, it sounds like those places are going to be the beneficiaries of lower usage in Europe. But all of it raises a question of what on earth are we actually doing at these global climate conferences, including the one coming up this year in Dubai. I'm going to be making this point at a Cleantech conference in Palm Springs and getting invited to fancy events, courtesy of Kat and Brian of Terrestrial. And I'll be on a panel that will be introducing hundreds of people who may have barely heard of nuclear in their life to the coal to nuclear transition. And one of the primary messages I'm going to be delivering is, as I've said with Chris Kiefer, if you don't love what coal provides, if you don't learn to understand, at least love even better what coal does, you won't properly replace it. And if you don't replace coal,
and what coal does is provide lots of local jobs. Am I just reading ahead here? Provides
lots of local jobs. No, I mean, the grid is for the entire economy, right? It's for for entire nations at a time. Sure, some local jobs. Yeah, it'll be harder to bulldoze your way through a landscape with zero local job providing wind and solar farms, but places are discovering that already. In fact, I've heard of a gentleman who's making a list of all the projects getting canceled.
Oh yeah,
that might look him up.
He's very popular with the wind and solar crowd. They love him.
Yeah, they tell me he's an asshole.
The renewable rejection database,
so
RobertBryce.com. Look it up.
The people at Cleantech Palm Springs are not like the kind of the local job people. They're, a conference is probably $3,000 a person or so to attend. This is, serious coastal folk looking for large, big business solutions. And I'm going to point out that if you haven't been to a coal plant, I'll see how many you have, probably not many, then you cannot appreciate the physical scale, the actual energy being provided by a single spot with days at a time of fuel on site that you can see with your own eyes. And that matters. That's real. It is real. Can the coal piles freeze up if you're not ready for proper cold weather? Yes. Are there coal plants operating in Siberia that are doing just fine in arbitrarily cold conditions? Yes, also. It's a matter of preparation. But it's not a matter of preparation for if the wind doesn't blow. You don't prepare the wind turbines for if the wind doesn't blow. You do prepare them for severe cold, which is how in severe cold calm conditions, wind turbines can be a negative contributor to get grid electricity just to stay warm enough to be functional if the wind picks up, right? Not a lot. I'm not trying to make some big argument that, oh, they suck up energy. No, just to stay ready, they're a little bit negative. But at a coal plant, you can choose to be prepared to have the same production that you do when it's warmer. That is an engineering choice, a financial choice that you get, which brings us to choice. Coal is option value for your economy, and you don't miss option value as you lose it until it's too late. That's the way it works.
So tie this back
Germany
now.
is running almost out of its option value. And when Germany is running out of its options, it chooses coal. That's the lesson. And if you want to replace coal, you need something that acts like what coal acts like in providing the option of having energy all the time.
And that is a nuclear plant with on-site fuel, which is inherent in the design. You have to have on-site fuel.
You could have a decade of on-site fuel if you so choose to.
Well, and this brings up one other quick point, and it's something that I've been looking at, and I've been making some slides and doing some work on it. I haven't written much about it yet. I've talked about it in many of my speaking engagements, but it's the transmission, stupid. That one of the things that to me makes this very clear argument about if we're going to, and TerraPower is exploring this. And I want to talk about TerraPower as well in just a minute. We're getting close to an hour here. By the way, a quick station break. My guest is Mark Nelson. He's the managing director of the Radiant Energy Group. You can find him on Twitter at Energy Bants. That's with a B, at Energy Bants. You can also contact him directly, Mark at radiantenergygroup.com. But the one of the main reasons I think this replacing coal plants with nuclear plants is that they can use those nuclear plants would be zero carbon, but they also can use the existing transmission grid. Here's the question. How have you looked at or considered how the expansion of the grid is going to be constrained or is already constrained for a lot of the new renewables that are being promoted? People saying, "Oh, we'll just add this hundreds of gigawatts of new renewables." Can it be done with from a transmission standpoint?
It's turning out to be extraordinarily difficult. Extraordinarily difficult. It's one of those things that's the ultimate difference between what you see as a modeler, as an energy modeler, and you just draw a line on a graph or on a map and say, see, that connects the wind area with the cities. Done. It's the ultimate difference between the difficulty of doing that in a model, it's not difficult, to how difficult it is in reality. Almost impossible. Because you can't have your line be 99% contiguous. Every single inch has got to have permission to exist. And it's not really a matter of saying, just underground it if people don't want to see it. Undergrounding it might still not get you permission.
Right.
And it could cost up to 10 times more while having particular drawbacks that make it vulnerable in different ways.
Right. And that's the other part. I've the numbers I've been getting are very good, but 1,700 miles of high voltage transmission are built per year on an interstate basis. Is something like 215. And that's since 2008 through 2021. So we're talking about
getting that can make the difference between a profitable wind project and a worthless pile of trash.
Right. Well, so let's jump back to the issue of nuclear fuel, because I mentioned TerraPower. They said they were delaying their project by about 2 years because of lack of HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium. The one other part of the uranium or the nuclear, what do I call it? The nuclear sector is the issue. We have manufacturing challenges, we have supply chain challenges, we have fuel challenges. How important is this availability of HALEU? And is the TerraPower claim that they couldn't get the fuel, is this valid? Or is the U.S. moving toward producing HALEU? How important is that Russian fuel to this rebirth of the nuclear sector, both here in the U.S. and around the world?
So big, complicated question. And
okay.
I love the technology they're working on over at TerraPower. Let's just be real clear. If they had unlimited supplies, that would not change the in-service date. I like to encourage honesty in nuclear communications. I'm not feeling amazing about that, but haven't yet talked to the TerraPower folks to see what they thought they were saying or what they meant to say. But yeah, I work with folks that want to make HALEU and want to use HALEU different ways, and that's not the holdup with TerraPower. So I'm not sure why they said that.
Okay.
Now, having put that out there, it is really important for, say, other companies that are way further along to get HALEU as part of offering advantages to our nuclear industry. And at the moment, so HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, is uranium enriched higher than the 5% or so that's the highest used in most reactors today in the commercial sector, but lower than the 20% that starts to make people really nervous in terms of high concentration, high purity uranium-235 that would be
Right.
used in, say, military propulsion or military reactors.
Right.
So HALEU is 5% to 20% enriched. Most people designing clever new reactors like to see what they could get out of upping that enrichment to 16, 17, 18, 19%. It means you get more spiciness with the fuel. It's got
Right.
more spark, if we're going to use
More,
figurative
more,
language
more
here.
reactive.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
You just have more options with how you can design and operate your device. Like, for example, running it for longer between refueling, or changing the design of the core to allow certain safety measures on heat removal by having a lower amount of total fuel but higher reactivity that operates. There's various things you can balance that are quite fun if you have HALEU. The problem is Russia. Russia has a very large amount of the world supply, not of uranium. They're not a big net producer of uranium at all. That's not it. It's of the enrichment cascades, the enrichment technology that we need to make regular fuel, and that we would definitely need more of to make HALEU, to enrich further. So with a split in the middle of the world between those who want to buy from Russia if it's discounted and those who are not going to buy from Russia at any price because of the war in Ukraine, there's not quite enough enrichment as far as we can see on our side to keep prices low and meet demand. Now, prices going high means you would need to mine more raw uranium to throw more raw uranium into the enrichers and not use the enrichers so much to squeeze every last drop out of this stuff. Instead, we would need to put a ton more uranium in the centrifuges. But there's a problem there. In order to mine more uranium, that's not the huge issue. Miners have been severely damaged by the last decade of ultra low uranium prices, partly because of the importation of spent warhead material, used recycled warhead material from Russia. It was supposed to be like a security argument, but it helped defund America's fuel industry. Unfortunately, parts of it that are necessary. Yeah, details, right? I don't think it'll happen in the future. I think Congress is paying really close attention to this sort of stuff and unintended consequences in fuel supply. But yeah, we'll see. At the moment, though, in order to take the uranium and put it in the heavy uranium gas form that's needed for these gas centrifuges, there's a conversion step. The conversion step we're a little short on too.
And the companies.
So there's these little narrow pinch points that we know how to do it. It's pretty easy to do it. But if you don't have it, you cannot operate a centrifuge. That's a bit of an issue.
And the companies, I forgot. I met them. They changed their name recently. Begins with a C. It's not Centrus Energy.
You're thinking of Centrus, I think.
Is it Centrus Energy? Okay, yeah. So they've gotten a grant from the government. They're going to build. Their goal is to produce HALEU, but they're a couple years away, if I remember right.
Yeah, a couple years away, and some of the other options are a year or two away, depending on their success once they get the money. Once they get the money, if the money spigot turns on, when can we expect tons of HALEU? Literally tons of 20% enriched material. Well, there's a plant in New Mexico owned by the Brits, the Germans, and the Dutch. It's complicated, but they own the main enrichment plant used in the US. That plant could get an expansion with European technology, and maybe that's the way we'll go. Maybe we do that, and we try to get some domestic technology up and running. The Centrus cascades. And then finally, we have a little ace in the hole, should we choose to use it.
And which is what?
Work. Laser enrichment, the most advanced enrichment technique ever developed. The idea is that you make the same uranium gas as before, blast a laser through it, it selectively energizes just the uranium you want, you take it out, and you make your batch. So it's the only privately held top secret technology in the US that's normally not possible to get top secret top secret status for stuff developed in a noisy private world. It's not really what happens, right? Stuff can move the other way if it's declassified, but typically not too classified status. Well, some Australian scientists came up with a process to laser enrich, couldn't quite turn it commercial. Heck, Australia doesn't even have enrichment. It doesn't do that part of nuclear, just the mining, just the dirty part, not the really clean, profitable part. So then the US got this technology over here, got it classified, and now some private companies are working to develop it into the most advanced enrichment in the world. If the money spigot turned on, this ace in the hole could be ready by late 2027 or early 2028. If we went now, that would be phenomenal. I think that'd be amazing. And it might be that TerraPower wants to get America serious about it while announcing a delay that they would have to announce at some point anyway. Again, I don't want to piss off TerraPower. They're doing phenomenally interesting work. Cannot wait to see what comes out of the TerraPower projects. But I think we could, if we wanted to.
Gotcha.
America could get enrichment.
Well, and one of the things, just I should mention, TerraPower said that one of their goals, and they made an announcement with Pacific Corp during the IAEA ministerial in November in Washington. You were there, saying that they are exploring putting new natrium reactors that exist at 5 existing coal plants in the West. You mentioned Centrus Energy; they're publicly traded. Their ticker, they're on the New York Exchange. LEU is their ticker. So, Mark, we've been talking for it's about an hour, I think a little more by this time. I don't have my clock running. So, I always ask these questions, and you told me you were prepared. What are you reading?
Well, at the moment, I have about 5 books going simultaneously, a real danger sign, because there's a way I might not finish any one. But one that I'm finding particularly interesting is this. It's about Cluny, one of the great monastery systems that have ever existed, one of the largest churches and largest religious complexes in the world for hundreds of years, located in central France, that was sort of directly under the Pope and authority in the church, and acted as kingmaker and economic center in the medieval era. Fascinating to read about the way people organize themselves to improve their conditions in all times and places. So that's something I'm reading. And also this book about Dean Acheson, a name that young people don't know about. There's a pretty big generational split I've already found, and talking to people about Dean Acheson. He was the WASP to end all WASPs, boarding school buddy of the President Roosevelt and a lot of his administration, and went into government under Roosevelt and then stayed on and off until he helped create the world that we see now as Secretary of State under Truman. So,
and the title there was present at, what was it?
At the creation.
At the creation.
Yeah. And by present at the creation, that's referencing a quote from a medieval manuscript. Anyway, Dean Acheson was present at the creation, helped negotiate or himself established or led the process of getting NATO up and running, the Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods. Let's see. He also was there for negotiating the structure of the UN. He was the chair of the Acheson-Lilienthal report. That was the first attempt to deal with the awe-inspiring new power of atomic energy,
right,
both the civilian and the weapons part. He helped manage the Korean War and the fiasco with the eventual fiasco with General MacArthur. He was present at the creation of aspects of the world that seem to be in danger of falling apart today. So I wanted to feel what it felt like, in his own words, to be there during decisions as large as what we might have to make in cleaning up the messes in Europe now.
Well, I don't usually offer my own, but I picked this one up, and I'm just going to plug it here. Tim O'Brien, his book, The Things They Carried, which is I've heard about for many years. It's a book about the Vietnam War, just marvelously written. I'm about halfway through. It's not a long book, but just really brilliantly written. I don't say that. I'm very seldom say something is well written because I don't see very much good. I mean, exceptional writing. I see good writing, but exceptional writing is rare. Last question, Mark. What gives you hope?
Well, we're going to Belgium to mark the death of a nuclear reactor, but not the death of a nuclear plant. Assuming no hitches come up, seeing a green energy minister forced to negotiate a life extension of both nuclear plants in Belgium. Only one reactor at each, but it's a start. Well, that gives me hope. That's extraordinary. It means that there's hope even for some Greens, traditional Greens. Obviously, the Greens in Finland and a few other countries are already turning pro-nuclear. In Poland, they're almost there. But watching that means hopefully we can surround, isolate, and sufficiently inspire Germany to make a big change. That the change will have to come internally. They're strong enough to stand up to external pressure that isn't as far as military. I mean, they will stand up for their own bad plans all the way to the bloody end. But seeing Belgium change gives me hope that along with the pause in decommissioning the recently closed reactors in Germany, we may be a year from now still seeing nuclear power plants online in Germany, which nobody thought was possible this time last year.
Well, that's a good place to stop. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mark. Sometimes, honestly, hard to keep up with you because I'm listening. I'm thinking, wait, what is he saying now? But that's a compliment, and it's great that you could come back for a record fifth time, a record-tying fifth time. You and Meredith Angwin obviously are among my favorite people to talk about electricity, power, energy, grids, nuclear, and the rest of it. So my guest again has been Mark Nelson, Mark at radiantenergygroup.com if you want to get a hold of him directly, on Twitter at EnergyBants. Mark, thanks again for coming on the podcast. It's been great fun.
Thanks, Robert. Talk to you soon.
And thanks to all of you in podcast land. Tune in for the next episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. Until then, see ya.